Welcome everybody to our event today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I think most people have made their way in from the waiting room into our session. I hope this is the many of many conversations. It's 9 a.m. in Toronto. It's 10 p.m. in Beijing, if my mathematics are correct. The time difference, I think, should not be a deterrent to having productive conversations across space. This event is sponsored by the Eurasia Initiative of CERES at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, by the Belt and Road and Global Perspective Project, by the Asian Institute, all of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. And special thanks especially to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for their cooperation and facilitation in making this event today possible. Western audiences know fairly little about the SCO, but it's been involved in major transformations across Asia and Eurasia. And so we thought that it was time to have a conversation about the SCO and its role in our increasingly multipolar world. This year is the 20th anniversary of the founding of the SCO. And so it's a good time to take stock of the impact that the SCO has had and think a little bit about the prospects for the SCO going forward in the architecture of international politics. So today I'm delighted and honored, in fact, to welcome the Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Vladimir Norov. Mr. Norov has been the Secretary General of the SCO since January of 2019. A senior diplomat with decades of service to the Republic of Uzbekistan, Norov has had posts as Foreign Minister of Uzbekistan, as well as Ambassador to Germany, Switzerland, Poland, and Belgium, among other posts. Mr. Norov speaks English, German, Russian, and Tajik, surely a combination which is uncommon among diplomats around the globe. Mr. Norov and I met a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. We were trying to remember when Mr. Norov was running the most prominent think tank in all of Uzbekistan. And he struck me then, and he continues to strike me now, as a thoughtful, smart, decent, and quite forward-looking individual. Not only a diplomat, but a diplomat with a lot of substance. But more than that, because I'm an academic and because we are at the University of Toronto, one way you can tell that this is an academic event in part is that I don't have a tie, whereas Mr. Norov has a tie. I was struck by his commitment to open conversation, to analytic work, and to academic work. And this came through in private conversations with him, as well as through the activities of the think tank that he ran. And so we look forward to future conversations with Mr. Norov, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in general. And this is just the start of many great things to come. Once again, thank you, Mr. Norov, for taking the time, especially at 10 p.m., to have a conversation with us. The format will be this. Mr. Norov will give his remarks, which I believe will be 10 or 15 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Then we will turn to a series of questions, most of which have been submitted in advance. And if we have time, we will turn to additional questions as they emerge. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is for the audience members. Feel free to put questions into the Q&A, though I cannot promise, given our long queue of questions, I can't promise that we will get to every question. Again, thank you, Mr. Norov, for being with us, and hello from Toronto.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Mr. Edward Schatz. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome all participants to the video conference on the SCO and the new multipolar world. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the University of Toronto and to Mr. Edward Schatz personally for the idea of holding and organizing today's event. It is a great honor for me to participate in video conference with professors and others who representing today Toronto, among graduates of this university, 6 winners of Nobel Prize. That's why it is a great honor for me. I would also like to take this nice opportunity to wish everyone here a Happy New Year 2021 and wish good health and all the best. Our meeting today is dedicated to the role and place of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the new multipolar world, its interaction with other international and regional organizations, and its role in overcoming the social economic consequences of the coronavirus pandemic. We all witness that the modern world is undergoing a profound transformation. Global threats and challenges are multiplying, and the uncertainty and unpredictability associated with the coronavirus pandemic has also emerged. To combat the complex nature of the challenges and threats, we require development of collective approaches, as well as an awareness that no one can ensure their own security at the expense of the security of others. Under these conditions, it is imperative that all states observe the universal principles of equal and indivisible security, equally applicable to the Euro-Atlantic, Euro-Asian, and Asia-Pacific space. In this context, the necessity of building a universal, comprehensive, transparent architecture of credible security and sustainable growth based on the principles of the rule of international law, as well as equitable and mutually beneficial cooperation, is now at the forefront. In this process, the role of multilateral structures and regional organizations like ASEO is undoubtedly increasing. With the accession of India and Pakistan, the ASEO has become the largest regional structure in the world that covers today 60% of the territory of Eurasia, with a population over 3.2 billion people. And the ASEO member states together generate almost a quarter of the global GDP. The experience of the ASEO can be considered the first in history of building an equal partnership of diverse states with a different economic and political potential and cultural and civilizational peculiarities. Today, the ASEO includes 18 states, 8 member states, 4 observers, and 6 dialogue partners. At present, at least 10 applications for becoming member, observer, or dialogue partner are pending, which is an indicator of the ASEO's growing prestige in the world. This year, the ASEO will celebrate its 20th anniversary. 20 years is quite a short period by historical standards, but in this relatively short time, ASEO has covered a consistent path of development and has demonstrated an effective model of multilateral interaction based on political trust, mutually beneficial cooperation, harmonious coexistence of different cultures, civilizations. First of all, the organization has firmly established itself as one of the most influential trans-regional platforms for the elaboration and implementation of multilateral approaches to preserve and strengthen global and regional stability. According to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the ASEO is a credible partner of the UN and is at the forefront of regional diplomacy. Since the very beginning of the organization activity, it has focused on countering non-traditional challenges and threats to international security, including terrorism, extremism, separatism, drug trafficking, organized crime, and information and communication technology related crimes. The past 20 years can be seen as a period of active development of multifaceted cooperation within the ASEO, successfully bridging national and regional interests in various areas of development. Today, the ASEO has a solid institutional framework. Its structural organs are operating effectively, and systematic work is underway to implement the goals and tasks of the organization as set forth in the ASEO Charter. Effective interaction has been established in the political and security sphere. Annual meeting of ASEO leaders allow us to compare notes on all pressing issues of regional and international agenda. I would like to especially note that despite growing challenges and threats and tensions in a number of areas around the world, the ASEO region has enjoyed sustained stability thanks to effective interaction in the field of security within the ACO. This is an undeniable fact. Over these years, joint efforts have succeeded in establishing a solid legal framework and effective mechanism of interaction. First of all, practical work is being carried out on the basis of the ACO regional anti-terrorist structure, ACO RATS in short, that has demonstrated significant results in countering terrorism, separatism, and extremism. Through the efforts of the ACO RATS, over the years, hundreds of terrorist acts have been prevented in the territory of member states, and effective assistance has been provided in tracking down and detaining persons involved in terrorist activities and in preventing the spread of extremist ideology, including via the internet. Countering drug trafficking is also an important area of cooperation within the ACO framework. Activities in this area are based on the ACO anti-drug strategy and its action program. I would like to point out that annually up to 40% of drugs intercepted across Eurasia are seized from the illicit traffic by the ACO member states. The ACO also conducted international anti-drug operation Spiderweb in July 2019 and March last year to suppress drug supply and distribution channels, primarily of synthetic origin, in the territory of the ACO countries. This operational resulted in the seizure of more than 10 tons of various types of narcotic substances. The issue of Afghanistan is of particular importance to ACO in maintaining peace and stability in, first of all, in Central Asia, which is the core of our organization, and in the whole of ACO. We emphasize that there is no alternative to resolving the intra-Afghan conflicts through political dialogue and an inclusive Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process. At the last meeting of the Council of the members of the for Foreign Affairs of the ACO member states in Moscow on September 10 last year, the foreign ministers reaffirmed their willingness to work together within the ACO-Afghanistan contact group and to implement the adopted roadmap for further action. As key goals and objectives of the ACO economic agenda, the ACO Charter envisages the promotion of comprehensive and balanced economic growth, social and cultural development in the region. The current ACO legal framework in the economic sphere consists of about 130 documents, the key ones being the development strategy until 2025 and the program for multilateral trade and economic cooperation of the ACO member state. Interaction between relevant ministers and institutions has been successfully established, and the ACO Business Council and the Interbank Association have been set up. We proceed from the understanding that regional security must be underpinned by the active development of trade, economic and humanitarian ties. This is especially important in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Within the framework of Russia's presidency in the ACO last year, which ended in November last year, we approved a comprehensive plan of joint measures to counter the threats of epidemics in the region. Among the priorities of Tajikistan current presidency of the organization is the development and adoption of priority action plan aimed at mitigating and overcoming the social economic impact of the current crisis. According to available data, the average decline in the GDP of the ACO countries in 2020 is 3.2%. This is lower than the global average 4.4%. But nevertheless, there is a need for innovative solutions that can put our economies back on sustainable growth. In this context, accelerated development of the digital industry could be the key to the global competitiveness. In this context, the ACO is currently actively discussing the digitalization of key sectors of the economy and the transfer of technology. At present, the volume of trade between the ACO member states amounts to no more than 5% of their total foreign trade turnover, which clearly does not correspond to the real potential of our cooperation and our countries. Therefore, in the next few years, we will place special emphasis on realizing the transport and production potential of the ACO countries, building new roads and railways, and creating a unified system of barrier-free green corridors for the transit of goods, including food and medical supplies. Strengthening of the transport and logistic cooperation in the ACO region will not only promote the rapid development of inter-country trade and economic ties, but also the creation of largest transit zone between Europe and Asia in the context of pairing the One Belt, One Road initiative with the Eurasian Economic Union and other multilateral and national development strategies in Eurasia. This process should be accompanied by joint work to integrate and eliminate disparities in the development of our countries and regions on the basis of the ACO concept of cooperation for the development of remote and rural areas in the digital age, approved last year. In accordance with the renewed ACO Multilateral Trade and Economic Cooperation Program 2035, an increasingly important role is being given to the development of environmental technologies, alternative and renewable energy sources. In addition, the post-pandemic economic recovery measures should focus on supporting the tourism industry, which has been hit hardest by the coronavirus pandemic. At the initiative of the ACO Secretariat, a series of events entitled The 8 Wonders of ACO are being implemented to demonstrate the cultural richness of our region and to give impetus to the development of interaction in the tourist industry. The Tajik side, which currently holds the ACO presidency, is planning to hold the first ACO tourism forum this year. The introduction of an annual practice of selecting the ACO tourism and cultural capital is also under consideration. This year, in view of the 20th anniversary of ACO, has been declared the Year of Culture of ACO countries, within the framework of which a number of events will be organized to strengthen the dialogue among civilization and further pursue the Shanghai spirit, the main content of which is mutual trust and benefit, equality, mutual consultation, respect for the diversity of cultures and civilization, and striving for joint development. I believe that in the current difficult conditions, these principles are more relevant than ever for all members of the world community who need unity and cohesion in the face of new challenges, regardless of the model of political and social economic development they have chosen. Dear participants, I would like particularly to stress that the outbreak of coronavirus infection has been an unprecedented challenge, not only for individual countries, but also for interstate institutions as a whole. The ACO countries showed a high degree of solidarity during the acute phase of the pandemic by supporting each other morally, politically, and materially. In this period, ACO established itself as a platform for countering epidemiological risk and received the highest international recognition, in particular from the UN Secretary General, International Organization, as WHO, as ASEAN, the European Union, the OSCE, and the League of Arab States. At the ACO summit held on November 10 last year, the heads of member states approved a comprehensive action plan to combat epidemics, including joint scientific research, development of vaccine, and effective diseases treatment methods. At this time, the demand for ACO as an effective venue for developing collective measures to overcome the social and economic consequences of the pandemic has significantly increased. It is important that ACO did not withdraw into isolation or quarantine, but continued to actively pursue its agenda and strengthening international contacts. Moreover, amid the pandemic, new useful segments have emerged that need to be developed in various areas of cooperation. In particular, we're talking about the promotion of telemedicine, traditional medicine, online education, e-commerce. For some of these areas, we have already held relevant events such as Traditional Medicine Forum, the SEO Startup Forum, the Conclave of Young Scientists, the digital exhibition, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, I have briefly spoken about the SEO and its current activities. Thank you all for your attention. I'm ready to answer all your questions with a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And this is the moment where normally we would see applause. And so I think you can imagine everyone in the audience providing applause to you virtually. The lovely thing about these virtual conferences is that we can have them across time zones, across geographic space. But of course, on the other side, we don't have the opportunity to give you the applause that you can actually hear. Thank you again for participating and for offering us these initial remarks, which I think are extremely helpful in setting the stage for thinking about the SCO. They're very useful as a start to further conversation. You've opened up a number of avenues for discussion, and we'll do what we can to cover everything that we can today, knowing that inevitably there's more to talk about. So that means that we'll have more conversations in the future. Because your remarks were fairly general, let me begin by asking some clarifying questions, and perhaps they'll give you an opportunity to provide more background about the SCO. I guess the first question is to think about the need for the SCO in the first place, because all of the member states of the SCO all belong to other regional organizations, right? So why is there a need for the SCO in the first place? What purpose does the SCO serve that is not served by other international or regional organizations?
Thank you. Thank you. Indeed, there are a number of regional organizations in the Eurasian space in which the SCO member states participate. Russia and the Central Asia states are members of the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. Russia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan are members of the Eurasian Economic Union. Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan are also members of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO. In addition, India, China, and Russia are members of the BRICS. These organizations contribute to sustainable development and stability in the region. Consequently, they complement one another to enhance sustainable development in the region. In the near as well as in the long term, the SCO aims to make the best possible use of its core mission of maintaining relation of trust, friendship, and good neighborliness between the member states, ensuring peace and stability in the SCO region, and shaping a new multipolar and equitable world order. With the accession of India and Pakistan, the SCO, as I mentioned it before, has become transcontinental in scale and in terms of collective potential, total population, territory, natural resources, and GDP. It is the largest organization, not just in the Eurasian region, but also in the world. In addition to various aspects of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and civilizational factors, the active participation in the organization of two major world powers, China and Russia, permanent members of the UN Security Council that implement the global agenda in their foreign policy, objectively brings the SCO to the forefront of the world politics. A prerequisite for successful implementation of SCO objectives in both domestic and international arenas is a non-aligned framework of its members' approaches to building cooperation to ensure constructive and mutually beneficial ties in various fields without infringing upon the interests of any party. It is important to note that in the SCO, there is no domination, elements of pressure, or coercion. There are no winners or losses, only a common result that is achieved on the basis of the principles of full equality and consensus. And why this organization needed for member states? It began, if you know, by 5 countries after obtaining independence, Central Asian country by disrupting Soviet Union, China established a good partnership with Russia and neighboring Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. They signed an agreement about building trust on the border, 5 countries. And in 2001, in 15 June in Shanghai, joined Uzbekistan in this fifth, and it was by declaration of head of countries, founders of organization, ASEO was established. Uzbekistan, by joining Uzbekistan. And I remember this time because I remember it was a very great challenge and threat to Central Asian countries by international terroristic organization and extremistic organization which tried to destabilize situation in the region in the time when our Central Asian countries had only 10 years of the independence. All of them had difficulties in economy and at the same time not yet strengthening state institution in security field and in all aspects of the statehood of our countries. And all this international terrorist organization concentrated on territory of Afghanistan, and they concentrated on our borders. There were some statements on the high level. This organization can move the borders. I remember the meeting of first president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, when I worked as state advisor in this time, 1997 and 97, when there were some of leaders of NATO and in Tashkent, they're meeting, and Mr. Karimov asked if these forces will move their border, can NATO come to protect us? There were not answers. And that's why this and Russia and China, the biggest countries, had the same challenges as threat. If you look into the history of last decades, and if you can look to this time, the end of 90s and beginning 2000s, there were a series of terrorist acts on territory of Central Asia, as in Uzbekistan and or Tajikistan civil war and several. And the same time on territory of Russia, on Xinjiang region of China. That's why this was common interest to all of countries as Central Asia and China and Russia to establish peace and stability in this core of ASEO at the region, Central Asia. And in 2004, it was established the Central ASEO regional anti-terrorist structure in Tashkent. And this structure played an important role for creating peace and stability by creating the trust, first of all, between special forces and law enforcement agencies to share information, first of all, and to organize common events against terroristic and extremistic organizations. For example, today we face new challenges when internet began to be used by such terroristic organization for recruiting our young people in the time of the isolation. We have 800 million young people. And only for last year, more than 20,000 information related to terroristic activity was dismantled from internet by our special forces. It is more important. And that's why when we're talking about ASEO, we're talking about the interests of member states. We had common interests, and it's played important role for establishing peace and stability, for by implementing the principle which is now entitled as a Shanghai Spirit. It could possible to create the mutual trust and equality between our countries, regardless different political and economic or people potential of member states.
Great, thank you very much. I think that you've touched upon a lot of the issues that I think we'll want to go into further depth on in a minute. You've provided a sense of the rationale for the organization, specifically at its origins, about the insecurity of the 1990s, and that the SCO played a role in producing greater security. We'll get back to that in a little bit, but I wanted to ask maybe a related question, because from a distance, especially from North America, the SCO was created at a moment of U.S. hegemony globally, right? The United States, of course, there were other trade agreements, and we could talk about the complicated architecture of, but in general, in the 1990s and early 2000s, it's a moment of U.S. global hegemony. And so from North America, especially from Washington, but I would say in general, the impression is that the SCO was created to counter US global hegemony. And I wonder if there's an element of truth to that claim.
Mhm. Thank you. It is for question, and I would like to mention that assumption that the SCO was created to oppose any country or international association, in particular, as some think tanks in the West outline it, anti-Western or anti-NATO or anti-US. All of this is incorrect. First of all, if we're looking for time of establishing this organization, as I mentioned it before, it was before 11 September, before America entering to Afghanistan. And that's why there were not any such desire for founders of this organization to be there against some these Western countries or United States or some, because we had the real threat to our territory from not from Western countries or from United States, but from international terroristic organization. But at the same time, in the declaration on the establishment of the SCO in 2001, its founding states declared their firm adherence to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. The organization follows a policy that excludes bloc, ideological, and confrontational approaches to solving international and regional problems. It is not and will not be a political military alliance or an economic integration association with supranational decision-making bodies. The SCO strictly follows the principles enshrined in its charter, including non-targeting against other states and international organizations, and actively promotes dialogue and cooperation with other states, international and regional organizations, primarily with the UN in its specialized institution. The SCO was not created to fight against anyone, but to maintain stability in the region, constructive partnership, and effectively take advantage of the geopolitical proximity and complementarity of the economies of the SCO member state. The SCO, as an influential today and responsible member of the modern system of international relations, will continue building up its contribution to ensuring peace and security and settling international and regional conflicts solely by the political and diplomatic matters based on the principles of equality, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in internal affairs of states, and renunciation of the use of the threat of forces. That's why we can say that all this assessment, which was part of discourse previously, and fully incorrect, and today more understand the importance of our organization for resolving many urgent problems on regional and international level.
Okay, thank you. I think there's probably more to talk about there, but we'll see what happens, for example, after January the 20th, if an inauguration happens in the United States of a new US president with a new administration, with apparently a greater desire to engage globally in multilateral efforts of various kinds. And so there may be some opportunity there to test some of these propositions going forward. Let me ask a question about multilateralism in general, because one of the things that we hear, at least in Western discourse, is that multilateralism is in decline. So we think about the G7, the G20, some of the challenges that they've had. The Bretton Woods institutions have been, of course, challenged. I guess I would propose the following. Multilateralism has served not just the interests of the West or of the already developed states, it's established a rules-based order that has helped any number of countries, including China, for example, to engineer its astronomical economic growth. And so I guess I wonder, from your perspective, does multilateralism have a future, and what is the role for the SCO in the context of what's the role of regional organizations like the SCO in the context of the kind of multilateralism we're likely to see going forward?
Thank you. Thank you for questions. What I would like to mention that peculiarity of the current stage in the development of international relation is a period of, as you rightly said, profound transformation associated with the formation of multipolar world order and the emergence of new centers of power with a significant influence on world politics and the economy. On the last summit of ACO member states in 10 November last year, in declaration of Moscow Declaration, it was outlined that politicization of world economic ties and lack of significant progress in reforming the existing international financial institution, as well as the global political and socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, involve serious risk for the sustained development of the world economy. Under these conditions, the process of reaching consensus on the key issues of the modern world is becoming increasingly difficult. Last year, this contradiction were joined by a pandemic that caused a surge in political nationalism and a demand for the sovereignty of states as opposed to the idea of multilateralism. The risk of unilateralism in security and trade have increased significantly, affecting the most credible multilateral institution and formats of interaction that emerged from World War II and the post-bipolar area. On November 23 last year, at a meeting with the heads of regional organizations in which I participated too, UN Secretary General Guterres said that multilateralism needs a global reset based on the development of an inter-regional network of partner organizations. It is in this context that the role of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which, as Guterres said, is a reliable partner of the UN, leading regional diplomacy, looks very special. I would especially like to note that the ACO Charter enshrines our organization commitment to the goals and principles of the UN Charter. And as the main goals and objectives of the ACO, the Charter notes strengthening and development of multifaceted cooperation to maintain and strengthen peace, security, and stability in the region, promoting creation of new democratic, equitable, and traditional rational political and economic international order. Another striking embodiment of multilateralism and diplomacy in ACO is the Shanghai spirit, the main content of which, as I mentioned it before, is mutual trust and benefit, equality, mutual consultation, respect for the cultural diversity, and striving for joint development. I consider that in the current context of humanity's struggle against the coronavirus pandemic, the principle of multilateralism become more relevant. Today, all states and international organizations are closely connected with each other, and the key to defeating this invisible enemy, which knows no borders, is global solidarity and international cooperation. The member states emphasize the importance of the further improvement of the global economic governance architecture and will work consistently to uphold and strengthen an open, transparent, fair, inclusive, and non-discriminatory trade system based on the principles and rules of the World Trade Organization, WTO, promote the development of an open global economy, and combat the unilateral protectionist measures which are undermining the system of multilateral trade and endangering the global economy. The member states view the WTO as the main platform for discussing the international trade agenda and adopting the rules of multilateral trade system. In order to make the WTO more resilient to the current and future challenges, the member states point out the need to conduct an inclusive WTO reform as soon as possible, focusing on its further development and adaptation to modern economic realities, as well as an efficient implementation of its monitoring, negotiating, and dispute settlement functions, emphasizing the importance of complying with the obligation adopted within the WTO framework. They will coordinate their approaches to multilateral trade rules of WTO ministerial conferences. That's why I would like to mention again that China certainly we now witnessing the big growth of Chinese economy, and in time if Chinese we can look as a multilateralism certainly supported to China, globalization supported to China to rise its economy. Today, China's second world economy of the world, but by some assessment of the international financial institutions in 2008 and 2028 and maybe 2030s, the China can be number one of world economy. And at the same time, if we're looking to the Chinese economic growth, it is threats or it is opportunity. The China played important role 2 times for saving world economy. First time in 2008 when it was world financial crisis. And this time by implementing a tremendous, huge by amount the investment programs, China contributed to stabilization of the world market, financial market. And at the same time, today, in the time pandemic, China could possible by tremendous efforts, which we've witnessed from the first days when being in Beijing, we are here, I'm here, and we witness it as China take tremendous efforts for taking under the control of the virus spreading, coronavirus spreading in the country. Recently, 2 cities in the Hebei province, there was identified more than 100 such cases of coronavirus. The China made a decision of government and the city administration not go out from home. And 18 million people now during 1 day, weeks or 10 days will be all of them tested on coronavirus. It is tremendous expenditure. It is free of charge, no one paying for this. But at the same time, it allowed to China and by their hardworking people and their discipline, I can say we could see, we impress it when we see when the drivers in the car, inside of car, they keep the mask. In March, we were in Geneva, we were in Munich, the same in the Munich Conference I participated, and in Geneva in March, in February in Munich, in March in Geneva. No one had the mask. We were surprised. Why no one take care? When in this time, China informed all world communities through WHO and directly that it is a danger of the coronavirus and show it. I was in, I can say that I was in Munich Conference where was panel discussions. There was a participation of the Prime Minister of Austria, Mr. Kurz, and Canada Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, and the Kurz said, China now during 10 days constructed hospital in the city where this coronavirus was, in Wuhan. And he said, but we will discuss 10 days. We would like to have such hospital or not. And then 6 months, we will discuss about these projects. We will discuss about how to implement these projects. It is the China is, yes, by such taking steps, key this economy with the population was 1.4 billion population, and by these big economies, and they could possible to take under the controlled situation and revive economy, and now giving impetus to growth of economy, and by this contributing to the world economy. And that's why when by all of this, I can say the result of following by Chinese leadership as SCO member states, the same following this, contributing for strengthening multilateralism and strengthening globalization's process. We living now in when we witness it, the digitalization become more platform in our social economic life, healthcare, educations, and any area. This is telemedicine became the same possible, and now our video conference, it is the same possible. The 1 year before, we never thought about that we will have such video conference. That is why multilateralism, globalization, playing important role.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, I think it's a nice reminder that you talked briefly about the role of China in the 2008 crisis, global economic crisis, and how China took measures that helped to shore up the global economy. I think it's important to remember that China also did that to save itself, which makes sense. But it's a nice reminder that just because that in our context of deeply interconnected global economies, doing something that saves yourself is also an action to save the global economy, and vice versa. So there are many opportunities for positive sum interactions among different parties. I guess the one area where I think there's opportunity for further conversation is, we don't really want to, we academics tend to be very critical, and we don't want to see a recognition of the possibility of positive sum outcomes become a moment of pure self-congratulation for everything that one has done. And in a moment, probably not yet, because I have another question that came in first, but in a moment I'll ask you about the things that the SCO does well and the things that the SCO does not yet do well. In other words, areas for improvement, because I think that that's part of making any organization perform more to its goals. But let me back up and ask you a little bit about, because this is a question that came in. It's related to your comment that there's no domination within the SCO. That you have member states and that they're all equal. And I wonder if you could tell a little bit more about how that, I mean, here you have Russia and you have China, which are not just big compared to the other member states, not just powerful compared to the other member states, but they are in fact global powers. And so as someone from Uzbekistan, you can recognize that Uzbekistan, and not to mention Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, which are even smaller and even less economically or politically powerful, pale by comparison to Russia and China. So what specifically ensures that the SCO is more than just a club or an agreement between Russia and China?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to mention that SCO can in no way be seen as a China-Russia project, especially after India and Pakistan joined the SCO. China and Russia, together with the other founding states of the SCO, have jointly built a constructive partnership and formed the benchmark of a new type of international relation in the spirit of equality, justice, and mutually beneficial cooperation. The consensus-based principles of decision-making within the SCO provides for leveling the asymmetry of capabilities of member states, because any of them, irrespective of its size, had the right to veto a decision that is unacceptable to them. Each country, in turn, holding the chairmanship during 1 year, chairmanship of organization, presents its own initiatives aimed at further improving multidisciplinary cooperation for the consideration of the parties. For example, under Tajikistan current presidency, a priority action plan has been proposed to mitigate and overcome the consequences of social, economic crisis caused by the pandemic, about which I said before. There are also plans to address a range of issues related to food security, as well as to address the social causes of terrorism and extremism. The Moscow Declaration of the ASEO Council of Heads of State approved last fall notes the initiative of all the 8 countries aimed at effectively addressing the issues of strengthening global and regional security and expanding trade and investment partnership between member states, including in digital and transport spheres, and deepening ties in education, science, culture, sports, tourism, and youth policy. In other words, the issue is not an abstraction, but a real practical multilateral mechanism that ensures an atmosphere of stability and predictability in the Eurasian region. The member states will continue to strengthen the issue as one of the pillars of the emerging, more representative world order based on the supremacy of international law, primarily the UN Charter, respect for civilizational diversity, and people's independent choice of the path of their political and social economic development, equitable partnership of states in the interest of ensuring equal, joint, indivisible, comprehensive, and stable security, progressive growth, and prosperity in the ASEO space, and the implementation for this purpose of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This last statement I read from the Moscow Declaration of Summit. And this declaration was accepted on the basis of consensus. What we're talking about, Shanghai Spirit, now in our secretariat represented all member states, each 8 countries, and together with joining India and Pakistan, their representative. We every day work and all our mechanism of cooperation on the expert level, ministerial level, and in framework of regional anti-terroristic structure. No one country can impose its will or its own interests over others. Only the base consensus, as you rightly said, and Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan cannot be compared with Russia or China by its potential, or India, but nevertheless, all countries have the equal right, and this is uniqueness of our organization.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question here that's related. I suspect there are many more questions one could ask about the relationships among member states and the role of the SCO in those relationships. This relatively small size makes, I think, possible generating consensus. And so one issue might be the larger it grows, the more difficult it is to achieve consensus on a wide range of issues. But let me ask a question that's come in. How generally does the SCO manage relationships among its member states? India and Pakistan, you've mentioned, they are the clearest example of tense relations. But China and India, for example, have an ongoing border dispute. Moreover, Chinese policy in Xinjiang province has been criticized by civil society activists in Central Asia. The question is this: do these tense relationships impose limits on what the SCO can accomplish?
I can say that SCO, the issue is not the business of resolving the contentious bilateral issues by their border related or otherwise between individual member states. I can say about the experience of our country, Uzbekistan, and other Central Asian countries. From the beginning of establishing this organization, founders agreed that bilateral issue will be not brought on the agenda. We had common interests: fighting against terrorism, extremism, separatism, stability and security was number 1. But at the same time, in this period, from organizing this during decades, from organizing this organization, there was some tension on the border between Uzbekistan and its neighboring countries, as Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan. Transborder waters issue was some rise attention. There was some prediction there. Maybe in Central Asia will be the Central Asia will be next Balkans, as it was predicted by Brzezinski and others Western experts. But what is important to mention, nevertheless, these issues, disputed issues, was between our countries, but no one, leaders of our member states, Central Asian countries, first of all, never brought this issue on the agenda of SCO. And this was because this bilateral issue could be resolved by countries individually on the basis of consensus by by election of the president of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, in 2016. The first key statement after election, after winning this election, he said that we should find solution for all disputed issues between our between our countries in Central Asia by on the basis of mutual reasonable consensus. And it was time when the borders between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan minuted. It was time when the people during perhaps more decades could not visit to their relatives. From Tajikistan to Uzbekistan, it was some lady which gave interview after opening border when it was possible to move freely to each country, million. Now each year, 2 million more moving from Uzbekistan to Tajikistan and from Tajikistan to Uzbekistan, same from Kyrgyzstan and from Kazakhstan. It is the same. But there was some lady, she said that 19 years I could not visit to Uzbekistan to see my daughter and my sisters and brothers. Now this wisdom of founders of this organization, I think, was rightly, because otherwise this organization, it will be a very big problem to resolve these issues, because such bilateral issues should be resolved by countries in any part of the world by their own decision on the basis of reasonable compromise, as showed this Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries. These issues must be and are resolved through bilateral consultation and dialogue, goodwill, and mutual responsible compromises, as I would like to say again. And that's why one of the principles of our Shanghai spirit is consultation. If there are such issues, their countries should consult between each other and find solution. The accession of India and Pakistan to the ASEAN as a major and influential South Asian states is of particular importance for the organization and the Eurasian region, as well as for the accession states themselves. India and Pakistan have a common ground in the ASEAN and work within the organization to ensure regional security, jointly counter the complex challenges and threats, and ensure sustainable social economic development of the region. It should not be forgotten that India and Pakistan have participated in the ASEAN for 12 years as observers, and their accession to the ASEAN was preceded by the rather lengthy preparatory phase. Currently, representatives of India and Pakistan work actively in two standing bodies of the organization, the ASEAN Secretariat and Executive Committee of ASEAN Regional Anti-Terroristic Structure. The India and Pakistan sides also engage in activities in all of the ASEAN working mechanism. Moreover, India and Pakistani military personnel participates in international anti-terrorist exercises of the ASEAN. Being at the same negotiating table and on a regular basis and in different formats, India and Pakistan are in constant dialogue on all issues on the current ASEAN agenda. It is well known, not to all that an ongoing dialogue, and especially one based on the overlapping long-term strategic interest, builds mutual understanding, trust, and seeks new points of convergence. The issues that exist between India and China also handled on a bilateral basis and do not affect the SCO in any way. And I can say that we have such a bilateral meeting, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China and India on 13 September in Moscow, where was the ministerial meeting, offline meeting of Minister of Foreign Affairs before summit, which was first time in history of our countries organized it on online format. In this framework, in the framework of this ministerial meeting of member states, there were bilateral meeting between two ministers of foreign affairs. At the same time, there were trilateral, where some countries have trilateral dialogue platform, like Russia, China, India have such ministerial meeting. It establishes such mechanism of consultation between them. That's why we can say this, bilateral issues which have these member states between them, all of these and all sides agree that this issue should be resolved on bilateral level. About Xinjiang, I would like to share some of my views. I can confidently say that today Xinjiang is a place of stability, of stable economic development, and 25 million people of different nationalities live in peace and harmony and contribute to China's development. Xinjiang lies in the crossroad of the SCO family of states, Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, making it a strategically important region for the development of the organization. For many years, Xinjiang has been actively developing ties with the regions of SCO countries in economic, trade, cultural, scientific, and technical and other areas. Uninterrupted rail transport and international airport is in operation, and the Khargos International Center for Border Cooperation is playing an increasingly important role in strengthening exchanges and cooperation between China and Central Asia. I would like to note that faced with a serious problem of terrorism and extremism last decade, the Chinese government has taken a number of measures to combat terrorism and radicalism in Xinjiang, which has led to the normalization of the situation and the growth of socio-economic development in the area, which also has a favorable effect on infrastructure development and effective measures to improve living standards of all nations which represented in this region. I can say that government of China is open, not hiding anything, and several visits of ambassadors of countries, foreign countries accredited in Beijing organized. We planned to organize in the last year, the SCO member states ambassadors planned the same, and me planned to visit Xinjiang to study our situation and to talk about how we can strengthen cooperation. And situation in Xinjiang now is very important for our Central Asian countries, because Xinjiang is a transport corridor, which now we try to develop. It is new transport corridors, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, China Railroad, is very important for our countries. And at the same time, we're actively now using combined transport, like by trucks delivering goods from our countries, from Tashkent, Andijan, Osh to Khargos, and then by trains, and the same from Termes and Dushanbe, Khargos by trucks, and then by container moved forward by the trains. These transport routes now actively using, and Xinjiang playing important role for our countries. And that's why we can say that I visited Xinjiang when I traveled to some member states through Urumqi airport. I can say this an impressive development of economy. The Urumqi airport before pandemics every year served 35 million passengers, and now in Urumqi constructed metro. So developing infrastructure, and at the same time improving life conditions in all regions, in all cities and districts of this province, playing important role. What is important? And if we're looking to the Chinese government for fulfilling Agenda 2030 for eliminating the poverty, 800 million of during last 3 decades taking out from poverty, and at the same time it from poverty taking all nationals who are living in China, the nations minority will living in the Xinjiang region. That's why I can say that what doing the government of China in improving situation in this province for interest of all regions and member states, because stability and security in Xinjiang in our interest too.
Okay, I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about. You started by mentioning that, and again, this is the start of a conversation. So I think whatever we don't discuss, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to discuss further in the future. The discussion of India and Pakistan calls to mind the very origins, the very early years of what would later become the European Union. Limited cooperation between France and Germany in a very limited area of coal and steel industries. Eventually, it developed trust and had a positive sort of spillover into other kinds of areas. So one can only hope that this kind of positive spillover from India and Pakistan's cooperation via the SCO will help generally to improve India-Pakistan relations in other areas as well. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, and the SCO can't cover everything. And I think it's interesting to hear that the SCO leaves some of the more thorny issues up to bilateral relations, and probably that's a practical way forward. I do have a question though, because here I am sitting in Toronto, in North America, and when I think about the kinds of, I guess, barriers to having conversations with the SCO or the member states of the SCO, one of the barriers seems to be very different understandings of what happened or what has been happening over the past decade, maybe 2 decades in Xinjiang, right? And so on the one hand, we have this clear evidence of economic growth, as you describe, and I don't think anybody is denying that, but it's not emphasized. On the other hand, we have widespread and credible reports of human rights abuses, mass incarceration, and so on. And I don't think we have to have a full discussion about this. But one thing that strikes me is that if there is to be closer cooperation between Western governments and the SCO, between Western regional or other kinds of organizations and the SCO, something needs to be discussed. Something needs to be overcome. This is a barrier, at least on the level of not understanding each other. And it presents, so when you describe that the Chinese government is not hiding anything, that's not the impression that we see in the West. In the West, the impression is that the Chinese government is hiding something. And so I wonder if there's anything that we can say about, just in the interest of continuing dialogue, providing more access to Western journalists, Western organizations, Western government officials, to this space, which I think is the epicenter of misunderstanding between the SCO, maybe China in particular, and the West. I realize that that's not. I mean, that's a question that comes from me. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. We can, of course, discuss, this further in further discussions later on, if that's something that if we can't get to everything.
And about cooperation with the Western organization or international organization, I can say that the SCO, from the beginning I outlined it, we are open and we are developing international ties which is a reflection of the activity growing domestic potential of the ASEO and its authority in the international arena. Of course, cooperation with the UN and its specialized agencies is an important areas of the ASEO international activities. First of all, it is based on the 2004 UN General Assembly resolution on granting ASEO observer status in the General Assembly. In 2010, a declaration on cooperation between the secretariats of both organizations was adopted. It was a time of presidency of Uzbekistan in ASEO, and I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I personally participated in the preparation of these documents and its approval. This document also facilitated cooperation between the ASEO and such relevant UN agencies at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and a number of others. And at the same time, I found contacts with the UN Regional Center for Preventing Diplomacy for Central Asia very useful. Cooperation is developing with the UNESCO, UNWTO, FAO, in which we see broad prospect, regular consultation between secretaries general of the UN and the ASEO, participation of the UN leadership in annual ASEO summit, the guests give additional impetus to the interaction between the parties. Particular practical cooperation primarily focuses on such critical issues as combating terrorism, drug trafficking, and other types of transnational crime, including in cyberspace. In 2011, the ASEO countries submitted to the 66th session of the UN General Assembly the rules of conduct in the field of international security, which have been actively discussed for several years, and in 2015 were introduced as an official UN document. Great importance is attached to institutionalizing cooperation between the ASEO regional anti-terrorism structure and the relevant units entities. Another example of our fruitful interaction with the UN is the ASEO Secretariat's long-standing close contacts with the ESCAPE. With the support of experts of this organization, we were possible to draft agreement between the governments of the ASEO member states on facilitation of international road transport. At the same time, we are very actively cooperating with neighboring organizations. ASEAN, we have the MAU between our organizations, and I had opportunity in 2019 two times meet with the Secretary General of ASEAN, one time in Jakarta, second time in framework of UN General Assembly in New York. At the same time, we are cooperating with CIS and CSTO as due to their specific relations are primarily built on the basis of regular political consultation. But at the same time, with the UNODC, we have every year high-level special event in Wien. On it was in March 2019, and on UN and ASEO encountering drug trafficking through darknet in last year, not in 2000, last year was held in Wien. In addition, we are also actively working with a broad international coalition known as the Paris Pact Initiative, an important mechanism in the fight against the drugs originated in Afghanistan. In 2019, Secretariat organized in Shanghai such meeting of experts and specialists from 15 countries and 6 international organizations. But at the same time, in November 2019, we had a high-level joint event, UN and ASEO, working together to promote security and stability, countering the symbiosis between international tourism and drug trafficking and cross-border organized crime, which was held in New York with the participation of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. I can say the representative of 180 countries participated, and many from European Union and United States. And last year in February, the Secretariat also attended the 82nd session of the Economic Commission for Europe's Inland Transport Committee in Geneva. on the margin of this session, a high-level joint event we organized by the UNEC on implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development along the Transcontinental Eurasian Transport Corridor. And we now prepared MAU for signing between our organizations. The SCO has established cooperation with the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and other European international organizations at the same time with European Union in Central Asia to counter modern threats and challenges and develop transport corridors. The 5 SCO member states, Russia, Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are the members of the OSCE. Both organizations have similar objectives and goals, which confirm the importance of close cooperation between them. On 10 July 2019 in Wien, an SCO delegation led by me took part in the OSCE Forum for Security Cooperation on the theme synergy between international regional organization and the OSCE in Central Asia. On 24 June last year, at the invitation of OSCE Secretary General, the SCO Secretary General, personally attended the OSCE Annual Security Review Conference, which was held in online format. So what I can say is we are open for dialogue with European Union. And 2019, I had special meeting with all ambassadors of European Union in Beijing. We had more, perhaps 2 hours discussions. They had all questions, which is you mentioned today too, about activity of our organizations, about the issues which is on the agenda of European Union in regarding of SCO member states. So this year, with the pandemics, we could not have the big such meeting with all member states representative here in Beijing, but we had a common meeting with the ambassador, German ambassador, who Germany had the presidency in the SCO last year, second half of the last year, and the representative of the European Union in Beijing, the ambassador. That's why we had open discussion. We open for such dialogue because European Union has a strategic partnership with many member states of our organization, renewed strategy of European Union for Central Asia adopted last years. It is where they mentioned that they will monitor the activity of SCO. I said, okay, it is good that you are monitoring. We are ready for discussing any question, but I met Helmut Schmidt, Mr. Helge Schmidt, excuse me, very good. I worked with her in Brussels when I was head of missions. It was time when she urged me as ambassador of Uzbekistan to be more active in the multilateral cooperation in Afghanistan, Central Asia, EU. In this time, we had position only on bilateral level with the election of President Mirziyoyev, Shavkat Mirziyoyev. Uzbekistan have the new policy for Afghanistan and outlining strongly that Afghanistan is historically, culturally, ethnically, and geographically is a part of Central Asia, and a more different politics now in regards. And we more talked with her, we know each other. And my last visit to New York in 2019, we had a special meeting with her. We asked at this meeting, and I talked about that we should develop good partnership between our organizations. And in Munich Conference, first I participated first time as a Secretary General. I was as an ambassador in Germany. I participated before. I know Mr. Ischinger from his time when he was State Secretary of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany. And there was some the panel discussions. I'm glad that I was invited. There are discussions. Mr. Kupchan, I think, yes, at the American Export there, he was one of speaker, and their agenda was if the threat of union of Russia and China is threat to the West. So I said, okay, you're looking to this from your point of view. But at the same time, when we're looking from this unity, we see the benefits. When we had on our borders a real threat, when in 2001, terrorist organization with a big agenda for reviving the caliphate, as they thought, and they tried to destabilize situation. Only the unity of two countries with Central Asian countries and establishing this organization helped it to us to avoid the worst scenario of development of Central Asia. Security, stability in Central Asia is very important, not only for ACO, but for whole Eurasian region. And that's why European Union, one of the international regional organizations which is focused after independence of our countries to develop such mechanism, EU Central Asia. And now such mechanism, we have Korea Central Asia plus or Japan's plus Central Asia. Now United States and Russia recently made such initiative last year, first time China plus Central Asia. So you see our common interest for European Union and ACO. For example, as I mentioned it before, 40% of drug we seizing every year, which is from if in Europe there during year time 1 kilo, 1 ton, we are only for one operation confiscating 10 ton of drugs. And majority of these drugs transported certainly to European countries. And at the same time, now drugs became one of the main resources for financing terroristic activity. It is, we see the cohesion of drug trafficking with the terroristic activity. That's why such panel discussion in UN played important role and raised interest. More than 180 countries to participate in this dialogue organized by the two secretariats and by Mr. Guterres and our organizations. And that's why we are open, and there is Eurasian continent play important role. And what it is reality, we should not avoid this reality. It was predicted 3 years before by World Economic Forum in Davos. They published some analysis of Western think tanks, financial think tank, that in 2035, 10 economies of world will consist of $190 trillion. So 60% of this all amount of world economy, which is among 10 countries, it will be economy of China, India, and Russia. So it is reality that the world economic development transforming from the West to the East, to the Asia, to the Asia region and ASEAN region, two very close will play important role in world economic development. And Mr. Mitterrand in 2019, when he participated in opening ceremony of in Shanghai exhibition exhibition of import, which is China, only one country in the world organizing exhibition of import. And last meeting last year in November, in opening ceremony of this exhibition in online format, Mr. Xi Jinping outlined that after decades, China will import 23 trillion American dollar the goods and services. It is a question of contributing to world economy, development of our countries, and at the same time to European Union. That's why recently European Union and China signed this agreement about free investment for investment agreement to make such comment. That's why it is important for our organization. As I mentioned it before, our organization, not military political bloc or some organization with a supranational structure as the European Union or others regional organization, and no one decision will be imposed, because all member states have their own partnership, strategic partnership with European Union, not only with the whole European, but its member states, take it Germany or France or Eastern and Central European countries, which each of them, they have the interest, and never they will take decision contrary to their own interests, regardless interests of some powers, big or small. And that's why I try to convince the European partners to organize such dialogue. First of all, we organized it in 2019 in Wien, such dialogues with the Austrian think tanks, and it will play an important role. For first steps, I propose it to in Brussels to organize such, and to Helga Schmidt, I propose it to her. Now she is in new positions. She now elected as the Secretary General of OSCE, and I hope that we will continue our cooperation with her in her new position, as we had very good cooperation with the former Secretary General of ASIO. So that's why we should look seriously to the common our threats and common our challenges. I said about this digitalization. Yes, now we see as it's moved very fastly, and we witness it here in China, had the such digital economy played an important role, and big companies in digital area, they made big service for healthcare, for the delivery, and when perhaps many people were isolated. And now is by Microsoft predicting that in 2025, 145 million new labor places will be opened in the digital industry, and by developing artificial intelligence, 5G, cohesion of artificial intelligence and 5G, and Internet of Things, and other such new fintech and so on. It will give the big impetus. So, but in parallel, as it predicted by World Economic Forum in Davos, said cybercrime will grows rapidly too, and we're witnessing now. It has become, when we could witness reducing street crimes in our countries, but we could see the rising crimes and frauds in internet. But if in 2019 in the internet cybercrimes, the amount of was perhaps 1.3 trillion US dollar, but in 2022 they're predicting it will be $8 trillion. So it is, we should join our efforts for fighting against such criminality and for protecting our economies.
No, this is extremely helpful, and I think that you're right to be thinking forward, not just thinking from where the SCO has come, obviously created under particular circumstances with an emphasis on security. It sounds from your remarks like there's a bit of a shift to thinking about other areas in which the SCO can become an effective forum, not just for its member states, but for those who wish to cooperate with the various member states. Mr. Norov, I'm very aware of the time, not just because we promised to finish at 10:30 Toronto time, but because 10:30 Toronto time means 11:30 p.m. in Beijing. Maybe you have energy for one more question.
Yes.
Just as a way to finish off. But again, let me just say thank you for your stamina. Thank you for lasting until 11:30 at night. I think it speaks well to your interest in facilitating cooperation with Western audiences, Western organizations, Western governments, and so on. So on that, let me ask you, and my apologies to those who ask questions in the Q&A, and to those who asked questions online that were or sent in questions that we just simply couldn't get to. There's a lot to talk about here. The good news is that it's the start of a conversation, not the only conversation we will have about the SCO or with the SCO. I hope going forward. So we'll get to more areas later. But let's end with this question, Mr. Norov. What do you see? I mean, here we are sitting in Toronto. I'll speak for myself. I'm sitting in Toronto. Some members of the audience probably are as well, or at least in Canada or North America. What are the areas of potential cooperation between the SCO and Canada, for example? And related, two other related questions. What do you see as the opportunities that might emerge for interacting with the Biden administration in the United States? which obviously has a very different intent with regard to international engagements than did the Trump administration. And then finally, another sort of sub question is, and this came in from during our session, does the SCO provide opportunities for dialogue with non-state actors, so business, civil society, etc.? Because a lot of what you've been talking about is, and understandably so, interstate relations between high level officials. And so I think that probably our audience is interested in knowing about opportunities for creating dialogue that might be not necessarily government to government, but might be more civil society to civil society. So let me end with that. You can, there's a lot to say. I know you won't get to everything, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. In regard of our potential of cooperation between the ACO and Canada, what I can say that over the 20 years of its existence, the ACO has evolved into one of the world's largest regional organization with a great potential in virtually all spheres. Our openness and desire to cooperate in building a stable and prosperous world is reflected by many international associations, specialized institutions, and think tanks from the Far East to Europe. At the same time, I would like to note that in the countries of the Western Hemisphere, they know little about us, that's why they are raising the question, is ACO anti-Western, anti-NATO? I'm sure that Canada and ACO have a lot of in common, common interests. First and foremost, it is a maintenance of peace and stability. Ottawa stands at the origin of the peacekeeping movement. It was its idea to create the prototype of modern UN peacekeeping missions. It initiated the first UN emergency force in 1956 to maintain the ceasefire between Israel and Egypt, which lasted till 1967. Canada has also contributed to the stabilization of Afghanistan, notably as a member of the International Security Assistance Force for 13 years to ensure stability in this country. The protection of human rights and the promotion of gender equality are of great importance in today's world. Women's full participation in political and socio-economic affairs is a prerequisite for economic development, democracy, and stability in all countries of the world. In this context, it is gratifying to note Canada's involvement and initiative in advancing women's rights, particularly in developing gender analysis, improving institutional mechanisms for women, and protecting the interests of the most vulnerable groups of women, refugee women, women with disabilities, and members of ethnic minorities. Ottawa's proposal for combating violence have received the most recognition. In 1993, at Canada's initiative, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and established a special rapporteur on the issues. I am pleased to note that women play a special role in shaping a common future in the ACO region, as women make up more than half the population of the ACO countries. So all spectrum of life in our countries have a female aspect. Equality and full participation of women in political and social economic tasks is a necessary condition for economic development, democracy, and stability in the societies of the ACO countries. The share of women's employment in ACO countries and their level of participation in various economic spheres currently averages 49% of the total female population. Women are predominantly involved in healthcare, education, agriculture, and trade, and the level of women representation in politics is increasing. For example, the proportion of women in the ACO member states parliament is almost 20%, and women at ministerial level make up about 10%. And we, in framework of our organization, in accordance of the ASEO Development Strategy 2025, which coincide with the UN Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Gender equality is one of the priority of our activity. That's why last years we organized 2 forums of women. Now we're focusing on institutionalization and development of a regional mechanism in framework of ASEO for raising the question of women rights, where will be gender equality will be on the focus of our organization. That's why in my last visit to New York in framework of UN General Assembly, I especially had the meeting with the UN Women, such organization, non-governmental organization. We talked about their leadership, about developing such partnership, and to discuss how we can transform the experience of this organization to our organization. We are certainly, if it's Canada, if we're looking to this issue, we're open for discussion or cooperation. But what is important, it is important what you organize it, the discussions between your university and think tanks of Canada and Secretary General of ASEO. And what I can say that in framework of our organization, we every year organizing the forums of ASEO, where think tanks of all our countries, observer countries, partners of dialogue, have every year one meeting. We are talking about all issues concerning our countries on regional and international level. So we, as I told you, interested for organizing such talks between our think tanks, between us and European Union. As I mentioned to you, we had such in March last year when I was in Wien. We had this with the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. There was discussed roundtable on the role of ASEO in promoting peace and security. So the same thing, common discussion could be organized between think tanks, institution, and Canada and ASEO member states, and we're open for these discussions. So if you could, all issues we should openly discuss. We should we can find the common ground for further cooperation. As I mentioned to you, it is today reality that ASEO became influential and at the same time biggest regional organization which cover all issues which concern our countries in the field of security, stability, and at the same time in economic development. For example, ASEO countries have more than 300,000 kilometers of the railroad. But now we are witnessing, as in the last year, Chinese transporting of goods by railroad rising to Europe, from China to Europe, more than 70, perhaps 70%. And at the same time, this, what is made recently, China constructed new speedy train for transporting the goods, 360 kilometers per hour day. And they presented this, and in YouTube you could see it if you like to see how it functioned. At the same time, it was question of transport moving through Central Asian countries, because in Russia, difference the size of railroads, but they now constructed new train, which automatically changing the size of their vehicles and adjusting, because now we're witnessing that railroad became very trustful and very effective transport routes in time of pandemic. And at the same time, with the growing transborder e-commerce, delivery of goods became very important, time of delivery. And that's why speedy these transport routes, it is important. And that's why it is cooperation is important between European Union and ASEO member states in the field of transport. At the same time, if we're looking to the Canada, I can say that there are a lot of issues. It is climate issues. It is one of the important where we can discuss what we see, the melting ice with the rising temperature of the world. The problem will face Canada the same because and the same threat for our member states. It is real, and that's why all our states joined to the Paris Climate Convention, and we are seeing that it is time and important to all countries to join to this. And at the same time, what about your questions regarding the new election in the United States and to the election of Mr. Biden? And we certainly, as I told you, we are open for cooperation with all countries. There is not any restriction for dialogue. And as I told you, more than 10 countries would like to be the part of ASEO member state, ASEO family. For example, from Middle Eastern countries, the same time as some members of League of Arab States. Now we try to institutionalize our cooperation with them. We are now talking for signing, preparing the MAU, and the same time Israel, the same they raised interest for joining, and any country. But at the same time, now is not for us the main priority to raise members of our organization. Now we're focusing on raising efficiency of mechanism which we established in framework of our organization, because joining India and Pakistan, it is showed that it is for 1,400 documents adopted during the last 20 years, and these countries should join to some important of them. But some documents, some convention is open to all countries. For example, Convention on Fighting Against Extremism and Terrorism, adopted 2017. Any country can join to this. It's open, but at the same time, the ASEO family includes 18 states at the level of full members. If I not mention that, I can mention it is India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. For observer state, it is Afghanistan, Belarus, Mongolia, and Iran. And 6 partners of dialogue: Azerbaijan, Armenia, it is Sri Lanka, Nepal, Cambodia, Turkey. So at the same time, there is a growing interest to our organization, as I mentioned. The US is clearly one of the largest countries on the planet, and the member states are developing cooperation with Washington on bilateral basis. Some of countries have strategic partnership. However, I would note that the ASEO interacts with the US within the framework of international association, in particular through the United Nations and its specialized institutions, for example, anti-terroristic structure or UNODC, and at the same time, as in framework of OACE, we have such contact and cooperation. And I would like also add that the ASEO, as an open-ended organization, is prepared to develop cooperation with all interested countries and multilateral institutions with a view to strengthen inter-civilizational dialogue and promoting the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. As for the second part of this question about working with the President-elect Biden, we hope that he will make an effort to find a speedy solution to the current political crisis in America, which is now all the world witnessing it, and contribute to addressing the current pressing global issues. First and foremost, we are talking about the coronavirus pandemic and dealing with its consequences. I believe all countries must join forces in the crucial period of the fighting against pandemic. The world can win the final victory in this fight if we do not allow further fragmentation, stigmatization, and politicization of the problem. Intellectual, material, and political resources must now be deployed to prevent a coronavirus pandemic altogether and for the economic recovery of the global economy, which, as now mentioned by many, perhaps all leaders of the world, the last 100 years, our world community never faced it before.
Yeah, thank you. Am I on? Yes, I am. Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, I think you give a good sense of the opportunities that present themselves, and I think that you're probably right to emphasize the opportunities, as I suspect we'll be turning a page at least on the foreign policy orientations of North American countries and the preoccupations, both because of the coronavirus. With uh, with smart policy and maybe a little bit of good luck, we'll get under control, and also because of the change of administration in the U.S. to something more interested in global engagement than we've seen over the past 4 years. I want to say again, your commitment to having this kind of conversation, I think, says a lot. The fact that it's almost midnight in Beijing, you've been a model of stamina and active engagement. I remember that from our conversations in Tashkent. It's clear that you're able to translate this stamina and work ethic into terrific results at the SCO. More is to come. I am sure that as we have dialogues between Western think tanks or academic institutions and the SCO and or governments or NGOs from the West and the SCO structures, that we won't agree on everything. I think that there are clear areas of disagreement, and that's, I think, natural. On areas of human rights protections, on areas of the treatment of minority populations. I think that that's a key area, and there's no point in pretending that we don't that we agree on everything. But the one thing we do agree on is the need for ongoing dialogue and discussion. And it's terrific to hear that there's this meeting of think tanks, because I think that that's one concrete area in which we can move forward. And I'm sure there are dozens of others as we begin to think about the future. I want to thank you again for this terrific conversation. One of the great things about there aren't very many great things about the pandemic, but if we're looking for silver linings for the pandemic, it has given us the opportunity to become more comfortable with long distance conversations via Zoom or other platforms. I hope that will remain a possibility for us going forward. It enables these kinds of conversations to happen where in the past they would not have happened. But Zoom has its limits, right? Because as soon as we hang up on this conversation, there will be no applause. There will be nobody there to shake your hand and say thank you for a terrific conversation. There will be no opportunity for me to sit down with you over a cup of green tea and discuss things further. But I guess we'll have to wait until we meet again off of Zoom, and I look forward to that day. But let me say again, thank you very much for your participation and for your willingness to stay up so late to engage in dialogue with us.
Thank you, Mr. Schatz, again for your initiative to organize this video conference. I thank all participants who monitored or could see my presentation and my answering to the question which can have the Toronto University think tanks or other Canadian think tanks or ordinary people. All questions, maybe I not answer to all questions, but at the same time, I'm ready for such discussions during this year. This year, my last year of my work as a Secretary General, and all of us, we hope that this year will be with the innovating vaccines and by vaccination of our population, it will possible to take under the control the coronavirus on the world, and we will possible to meet each other. Yes, coronavirus made to us possible to talk with us immediately, and rise the number of participants of discussion. If before a round table or conference or forums was 1, 2, 3 days, today sometimes 10 days, because number of participants is growing. But it is good from one side that we can hear everyone, because now everyone, not only think tanks or not only officials, but representative of novel non-governmental organization and ordinary people now concerning about situation on regional and international level, because we benefited last decades the world economic development in majority of our countries, and we are sure that it will follow always, and as we had in previous, but coronavirus showed that we have some threat which showing to us that our world is very vulnerable to such kind of threats, and we should join our efforts. And that's why intellectual potential of countries and the international and non-governmental organization and ordinary people, and not only specialists, but ordinary people, very important today. That's why I'm ready for any discussions. We will be possible for organizing such events, and I will be glad if next year, no, I'm not sure for this year because I'm staying here in Beijing, but in some engaging more in ACO activity. But next year, we'll be glad to see you in Uzbekistan.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely. I have that to look forward to. And if not Uzbekistan, then Toronto. It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you to our audience for the great questions. Again, apologies that we couldn't get to everything, but thank you for this. There will be a recording of this that will be made available, I believe, on YouTube. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you again, Mr. Norov, and sleep well tonight.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Best wishes. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thank you.